Every empire trusts its money. Every people make the same mistake. Every empire says, our money is safe. Every government swears, our promises will last forever. But history proves them wrong every single time. From Rome to France, from the Confederacy to modern Lebanon, people woke up one morning to find that the money they had spent a lifetime saving was suddenly worthless. Their salaries meant nothing. Their idea of the future had vanished overnight. Collapse isn't the exception. It's the rule. The real question isn't, will the system collapse? It's, when it does, how will you protect yourself? The greatest mistake is the illusion of permanence. We look at our bank balances, at our national currency, and tell ourselves, this is solid. This won't change. But money isn't stone. Money is trust. And trust can evaporate overnight. That's why history, though cruel, is useful. Every collapse leaves behind lessons, patterns, and warnings about what truly protects wealth, and what disappears with it. And if you look closely, you'll notice this: the ones who survive are never the most faithful believers in the system. They're the first to doubt it. Byzantium, when even gold lost its trust. The Byzantine Empire is often described as Rome's eastern heir, a civilization that outlived the West by 1,000 years. At the heart of its economy was a gold coin called the solidus. For centuries, merchants from Europe to the Middle East trusted it without question. It was so stable that it became the reserve currency of the Middle Ages. But here's the irony: centuries earlier, Rome had already made the same mistake. Its emperors diluted the silver denarius with cheap metals, and the currency eventually collapsed. History had already taught that lesson. Yet Byzantium fell into the same trap. They reduced the gold content, mixed in copper, added cheap alloys. At first, no one noticed. But once trust cracks, collapse follows. That once rock-solid coin that carried Mediterranean trade for centuries became nothing more than a political fable. The economy faltered, confidence vanished, and trade froze. Who won in the end? Not imperial decrees, not printed promises. The winners were those who quietly held real gold or land beyond the empire's reach. That was history's first great lesson: states cannot resist tampering with their money. And the moment they do, real value escapes. The Black Death, opportunity inside disaster. In the mid-14th century, Europe was struck by the deadliest pandemic in history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, half of Europe's population vanished. Cities emptied, villages disappeared, trade routes went silent. But it wasn't just a story of destruction, it was an economic transformation. When people die, labor becomes scarce, and scarcity raises its price. Survivors could demand higher wages. Land and goods were plentiful, but there were too few people to work them. Those who held liquidity, silver, goods, or even just labor power suddenly found themselves with unimaginable opportunity. Lands once considered fortunes could now be bought for almost nothing. Empty houses, abandoned farms. The survivors lived in a buyer's market. Sound familiar? It should. Because we lived through a modern version of it during COVID-19. Supply chains collapsed, governments printed trillions, and those with liquid assets, cash, stocks, real estate, thrived. Those living paycheck to paycheck were left behind. In America, home prices soared, stock markets broke records, yet millions couldn't pay rent. History repeated itself. Pandemics always redistribute wealth. They always have. Those who survived the Black Death turned scarcity into advantage. Those who emerged stronger from COVID were the ones with cash in hand. The truth is simple: crises reward the prepared and crush the unprepared. Florence, when too big to fail, failed. In the 14th century, Florence was Europe's financial capital. Giant banks like Bardi and Peruzzi lent money to kings and financed trade across the continent. But when England's King Edward III defaulted on his debts, everything collapsed. Banks went under. People's savings evaporated. Trade froze. Florence's wealth turned to dust overnight. That day, people learned a painful truth: no institution is truly too big to fail. Size doesn't mean safety. Reputation doesn't mean protection. The phrase too big to fail is one of the oldest lies in financial history. In the 1340s, it was Florence. In 2008, it was Lehman Brothers. In 2019, Lebanese banks. Different centuries, same story. The truth remains, institutional promises last only until the day they don't. And when that day comes, your savings go with them. The American Civil War, the collapse of paper money. The American Civil War is usually remembered for its battles, but behind the front lines there was another war, a war of money. The North printed greenbacks, paper money backed not by gold, but by the government's word. The South printed graybacks and printed far too many. The result? Both currencies lost value rapidly. Before the war even ended, the South's money was worthless. People saw their wages turn to dust before they could even spend them. Families carried sacks of cash that couldn't buy a single loaf of bread. Who survived? Those who held real assets, land, food, gold, things you could touch, not just promises on paper. Americans often forget this, but their country once lived through total monetary collapse. And even then, protection didn't come from government promises, it came from owning real value. The French Revolution, when value vanished overnight. In the 1790s, France was in revolution. The king was gone, church lands had been seized, and the new government began printing a currency called the assignat, backed by those confiscated lands. But soon, control was lost. The state kept printing more and more. Each new note made the previous one worth less. Prices exploded, wages collapsed. Farmers refused paper, demanding silver instead. Bread riots erupted in Paris once again. And the revolution devoured itself, this time, through its own money. Who survived? The same as always, those who held gold, silver, land, food, things the state couldn't print. The Asian crisis, the cost of borrowing in another's currency. In 1997, Thailand's baht collapsed. Then Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea fell one after another. Why? Because they had borrowed in US dollars. When their local currencies dropped, their debts multiplied. Unemployment exploded, factories closed, millions fell into poverty. But those holding dollars or assets abroad stayed afloat. Another timeless lesson: when you borrow in someone else's money, you hand them your leash. And when the storm hits, they're the ones holding it. Lebanon, the day the banks closed. In 2019, Lebanon's banks locked their doors. No one could access their money. Accounts were frozen, and the currency lost 90% of its value. People who had saved for decades became poor overnight. And no one could say, "But that's my money." Because the banks had already lent it out. And when the crisis hit, they simply said, "We're not paying it back." This wasn't just Lebanon's story. It's the world's story. In 2008, Americans lost their homes. In 2020, governments printed trillions. By 2023, regional banks collapsed in days. All of it reminded us of one thing: what we call safe can vanish instantly. So what's truly safe? History doesn't give a single answer, but it always reveals the same pattern. In Byzantium, those who held gold won. During the Black Death, those with liquidity thrived. In Florence, those who didn't blindly trust banks survived. In the Confederacy, those with tangible goods endured. In France, those with food and land stayed strong. In Asia, those without foreign debt escaped the worst. In Lebanon, those who didn't leave their money in banks could still breathe. Survival isn't about who you trust, it's about what you hold. But wealth isn't just possessions. Skills are wealth too. The baker who can make bread, the craftsman who can repair, the farmer who can grow, the merchant who can move goods, they all came out of collapse stronger than before. Because money can lose its meaning, but production never does. Every crisis is a transfer of wealth, from the overly trusting to the cautious, from paper to the real, from the passive to the productive. History has proven it time and again. So the real question isn't, will everything collapse? Of course it will. The real question is, when that day comes, Will you be holding empty promises or something that truly has value?